Welcome to yCITIES Inside the Mind of an Investor series. yCITIES cultivates an intergenerational innovation ecosystem for middle schoolers and beyond, supporting a diverse pipeline of tomorrow's founders and investors. Angel investors are a vital part of the startup community, and while there are plenty of resources about how to pitch or how the process works, it can still seem like a black box as to why an investor chooses to invest, not only to the founders, but also to peer investors. So we decided that we want to have many conversations with many different investors and to focus on one investor at a time. Every interview is anchored by the same 5 questions, but each conversation is shaped through the follow-up questions influenced from the different lenses of our panel of hosts. Today, I'm super excited to introduce our guest investor, Joshua Summers. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you for joining us, Joshua. We'd like to start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself. Kind of what got us here, that being you're an investor, so we're wanting to talk to you. Maybe your backstory. Tell us a little bit about, the things that you excite you from an investment perspective, your risk tolerance, and kind of just give us the summary of Joshua.
Happy to do it. I probably fit into a category of investors that you've met, which are entrepreneur turned investors, as opposed to those who start off and say, I want to spend my career investing in other companies. So I went to undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon, came out and went into consulting immediately afterwards, and did that for a couple of years, but the economy was not good at the time. And so layoffs kind of went everywhere. And I was forced to go out and figure out what I wanted to do next and find a job in a bad economy. And so the best way to find a job is to create a job. And so did my first startup back then in 2002. And since then, I've been a serial entrepreneur. So I've co-founded 3 companies, been on early teams of 2 others, been through multiple exits, ranging from aqua rescues, which is like an aqua hire, but when you really need to find a hire, and all the way to a good outcome for our investors. Along that way, I've worked with lots of different types of investors. So everything from individual angels to super angels to angel groups, up to venture capital groups, early stage and late stage, and also strategic investment capital from industry. During that time, I've learned a lot about what it means to raise money and what it means to start companies, build companies, grow companies, fail in companies, succeed in companies. So about 10 years ago, I decided I wanted to start trying to put some money to work and going the other direction. And that's when I started doing my first angel investments. I didn't really have a thesis then. I went to a couple Techstars programs and found some companies that looked really exciting and wrote some checks. And that was kind of the start. And I would say I haven't really developed a thesis until recently, and we'll get into that, I think. But ultimately, I have a pretty high risk tolerance. I have a long-term view of my investments. And I like to bet on people beyond everything else. So I have a lot of different theories about what works and what doesn't work. I've got 10 years of history, but not a lot of kind of historical exits. And so I'm still learning. So do I know if I'm any good at it? No. I'm good at writing checks. I don't know if I'm good at turning those checks into good outcomes, although I have some. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, that'll continue to evolve and develop. And I'm in it for the long haul to continue to learn from it and try and make the best out of it.
In some of those early companies, were you more on the technical side, more on the business side?
So I've always been on the business side, but in early companies, you do everything. And so, I played roles of database engineer when I knew nothing about databases, to running, CFO when I knew nothing about finances, to marketing, to operations, to product, to, business. And frankly, I think, part of the value I bring is I'm willing to do anything, clean toilets, and run meetings and, handle sales and do whatever. I wouldn't say, I'm great at everything. but no startup founder is, in my opinion, right? A lot of what we do is we take on the tasks that we can't figure out how to fulfill elsewhere. We hire talent that's better than us in every way. And we slowly build out a team that takes on all the things that we were never great at, but we had to do anyway. So I've always been on the business side, but I've always had a kind of do whatever is necessary mentality.
Well, you definitely have enough technical chops to wear that hat when needed, even if you weren't necessarily the best at it. I think part of the reason that makes you a valuable investor is that well-rounded experience. So when you mentioned that your investment thesis kind of came more recently, so you went to Techstars, and so you did kind of focus on the tech side of things, and that was your starting point. Can you talk a little bit about, I'm assuming because you do have some technical background, that you started with Techstars as a vehicle to explore, I didn't know what my investment thesis or risk tolerance was, 8-9 years ago when I first started, right? And it gradually kind of came to that. And I found other investors who that we talked to were almost the opposite. They had a thesis, and then the broader their network became, some of them branched out into being more of a generalist. Can you speak a little bit about where you fall and kind of some reasoning behind it?
Sure. And first of all, I would say a generalist is a thesis. It's just not a specific narrow thesis. But yeah, I mean, all the startups I've done have been technical in nature, ranging from technical consulting through really, direct to consumer or consumer facing brands, to B2B SaaS companies, technology platforms. Really, over the last 15 years, I've spent my time in advertising technology. And so I'm very deep in that world. And actually, a lot of my investment thesis is investing outside of that, because I was so into that world that I stopped seeing what was outside of it, and I stopped learning about what was outside of it. And therefore, I lost the ability to find opportunities outside of it. And so as my thesis evolved, it became one of, I need to go find other areas that aren't ad tech related to kind of grow the area that I'm touching. So I would say that, yes, I had a technical thesis. I had an early stage thesis, which is, get in at the high risk, pre-seed, seed stage rounds in the early days. And that's evolved as well. But now I've invested in about 100 companies. And so, my first 6 or 7 years of investing, I think I tallied 8 companies that I invested in. And then it started to ramp. And really over the last 2 years, I've been extremely active. But that's also because I had a really, decent exit. And now I'm doing full-time angel investing. And part of my thesis around angel investing is you have to build a portfolio, right? You have, for every success story, you're going to have, 7, 8, 9 that aren't successful or are that, are break-even type investments. And so you have to build a large portfolio, and you have to manage that portfolio to be able to find a good outcome, in the long run. And so, there is a bit of a spread the wealth type investment theory that I'm going after, which is create a diverse portfolio, have it, reach across industries, some that, frankly, I think our economy is going to be a roller coaster for the next couple of years. So some that are going to be, potentially recession-proof businesses, some that, may go away if the recession is, but betting on the fact that maybe we sustain something for longer than we had going, betting on different industries and different stages and different type of entrepreneurs, and kind of mix as much as possible so that I can see over the next 5 years where some of those successes are, double down on those and kind of build from there.
You had done some of your university focus on mechanical engineering. So I'm just sort of curious, how did you switch from doing like hardware type technical background stuff to more software? You're talking about advertisement, you're talking about that. What drew you to that space?
So Isabel, to put it into context, I started my university career in mechanical engineering, but I did not finish my university career in mechanical engineering. I found that while interesting and I really loved it, I was terrible at the math side. And so mechanical engineering is a very math heavy engineering degree. And so I went on and completed dual degrees in business and economics. And that kind of fit a little bit better for me. And it was a more personality based kind of, career path. And so from there, Carnegie Mellon's a very technical school. So even if you're a business person at Carnegie Mellon, you're learning basics of coding, you're learning, kind of all of these skills around talking about technical things. And so coming out, I went and worked for a company called Sapient, which now is a very well-known agency, but at the time was really more of a consultancy focused on enterprise applications. And so everything they did was technical, right? You would get into a project, you'd assess the problem, you'd kind of, draw out the technical solution or the approach to solving that problem, and then you'd have a team that would implement it. And so I was on the, define the solution and work with the team to implement, not writing code, but helping to kind of bridge the gap between the business requirements and the implementation. And so that set me down this technical path, and a path that I felt very, very comfortable with. And so as Vicky says, I have technical chops. I would say I can speak the speak, but that doesn't mean I know what I'm doing, or could implement a thing. I have so much respect for real technologists and their, capabilities to implement. That's something that I've never had. And I actually regret, in a way, not finishing mechanical engineering or going into computer science or a truly technical field, because I feel like, that's where the magic happens. It's not in the requirement side, it's in the implementation side. But a lot of my investing now is very technical, although not everything. I mean, I'm invested in everything, in the technology side, but also I'm invested in, non-technical entities as well, from, breweries and champagne brands to women's clothing businesses to, things that really aren't technical in nature, but have a very interesting opportunity in the way that, they can build, grow, and define a market for themselves.
Okay, based off of all that, I gotta ask. So what makes stop, like, if you're doing all these different spaces, right, and you're probably seeing like hundreds upon hundreds of pitch decks, what makes you like take a second to pause and be like, okay, I'm really interested in this advertising company, and oh hey, there's this really cool brewery or a champagne or a women's fashion, or what sort of makes you stop?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's rarely I'm interested in this advertising company, because having spent so much time living and breathing advertising, I'm slightly sour on the industry, right? Like, it's not that I'll never invest in advertising technology, but I know it so well that it's so hard to find something that I find really exciting, unique, new, game-changing, and is more than just a feature, right? Like, where's there a company? Where's there an actual business that can grow, scale, define a market around it? That's hard in advertising these days. It's not impossible, but it's hard. But in all these other things, maybe I'm dumb enough that I just don't see those holes or those gaps. I don't have enough knowledge. But what I really do see is I see people. And I invest in people first and foremost. And one of the reasons why I love investing alongside other experts is they help me vet the other side, right? And so I'm part of an angel group called TBD Angels that we founded a little over 2 years ago. And I love it because it's got a diverse membership of experts, right? It's got people who know a lot about climate tech and green tech, and people who know a lot about prop tech and martech and fintech, and people who know about champagne companies, and people who know about women's clothing, and so I don't know anything about any of these, but I know these people are experts in those industries. And between betting on the team and betting on the knowledge that these experts have that are helping to vet the companies, I believe it kind of reduces the risk of the investment. Doesn't make it zero, but it reduces.
What if it's pre-pitch, right? Because investment, I understand that part, but like, if you're, screening through a lot of submissions or pitch decks, kind of like that environment pre-pitch, so she mentioned like how, what makes you pause to be like, I want to learn more about this one. I think I want to submit this one. I think I want to spend 45 minutes on a Zoom to meet this person, to then find out they're a great person or not the best team, right? Some people will meet a lot of entrepreneurs, and some people, that's not their favorite part. So they go to the pitch meetings or, look at feedback post-pitch meetings and go from there. Do you not do a lot of screening anymore these days, or?
I do some screening, and I have cold outreaches that come to me, and I have people referred by people I trust or people I know, and I look at a lot of it, right? There's the screens that come in from people that are, investors that are saying, here's a deal I'm engaged with, will you take a look at it? Those, they meet a bar, right? Like somebody else is, evaluating the deal. Like Vicky, when you bring a deal to me, I always look at it 100% of the time. Like, it doesn't matter what space the deal's in, whatever. I know you, I trust trust you, I look at it. That's not a very democratized approach to finding deals though, right? Like that means that somebody has networked and has the ability to network and could find you and get from you to me. And that works great for those that are able to do that, but that doesn't work for everybody. And so I get cold, inbounds. I don't look at every cold inbound because I mean, that's insane. There's a lot. But, to answer your question of what pulls me in, honestly, the initial kind of, if the email is too long, if there's 10 paragraphs that, I get lost, right? Like, but if in that first, 20-second, 30-second read, they've caught my attention either with, this is an interesting market opportunity, they've applied an interesting principle to their approach, or there's some interest in the team that's doing it, or I, believe that it's going to be, a problem that needs to be solved or a problem I've personally seen, then I'm going to read the email. I'm going to dig in. I'm going to look at the deck. I go the extra step. But it's really that first thing, right? Like if you can't describe your business in the first, paragraph, in a cold email, like it's hard to get over the line. And again, not everybody's great at that, right? Like some people need a lot of coaching to get there. Some people, it takes time. And I coach a lot of people on how to write that email. I coach a lot of people on how to, make a pitch deck that's 8 slides, but just crushes it from explaining, who you are, what the problem is, why your solution is unique, why this is a big opportunity, and what your ask is, checking off the right things. It's hard to learn that. And there's lots of great programs like Techstars and other, mentorship type programs that bring people through that, but not everyone has access to that. And so I do try and digest everything that's sent to me. It's not always possible, but I think it's the right way to find deals that maybe I wouldn't see normally.
Phenomenal. It's almost like I'd love for you to double click a little bit on those items you just rattled off with respects to, hey, these are the 4 or 5 key things that you'd expect or want to see rapidly, maybe in that first paragraph to get your attention. We have, certainly a pretty savvy and diverse audience of folks who listen to our watch our show, I guess, and who I think need to hear those tips, right, to help them in navigating, right, to places and opportunities that are otherwise may not always present themselves. Could you first, for me, I got to follow on, but could you first double click a little bit on those items again? Just
sure.
Elaborate a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to practice your pitch, the first thing you need to be good at is describing yourself. And, that doesn't mean you have to have an unbelievable history of success, right? Like that's not, I invest in people who have, never made it through college. People are still in college. People are in high school. You don't have the history at that point to be able to point and say, look, I exited 3 companies for, greater than 300 million each. Like that. That's just not possible. So you still have a position, you have a personality, and you have to be really good at explaining that and explaining why you believe you are uniquely qualified to solve the problem you're going after. So that's like piece number 1 is just be really good at explaining yourself. And that's hard, right? Like a lot of people are not very good about talking about themselves, but frankly, people matter and we invest in people, and investing in people means we're believing that you have that unique thing that's going to make you successful. Maybe it's your ability to pivot, and duck, dodge, weave through the challenges that are going to come. And so just get really good at describing yourself is the first thing. The second thing is know your problem, right? Like, don't just say, I've got a solution. Say, I've got this problem I'm solving, right? And be very clear on what that problem is from a, who feels the problem, how do they feel the problem, and how big of a problem is it? Right. So like this is a problem felt by 80% of all, Fortune 1000 companies that are out there. It's costing them $3 billion every week in lost opportunity. It's if solved, it would save them 20% in annual costs for headcount. Like get really, really good at understanding the problem in every way you can. And not every problem has to be enormous, but it all has to be, big enough to be venture interest, right? Or angel investment interest, which means, it has to be able to scale to the level that it will produce a return for the investors that is meaningful, right? 3, 10, 20x is kind of, where most exits fall. Between that 3 and 10x probably is where, but what you want is the 100x's, right? Like the 300x's. When people say, I want venture style returns, that's what they want. But not every company is that, but you need to have a problem and be able to define it in a way that's big enough that says it will produce a solid return for the investors. The third thing is, you got to talk about your solution and why it uniquely solves that problem. And in talking about your solution, you have to talk about why it's different, right? Like what makes it unique to other solutions or other companies that have attempted to solve the problem, or other companies that are solving the problem, but maybe aren't solving it in a way that is as efficient as yours or as capital efficient. Maybe their solutions only solve it partially. So like, you got to be really good at not just defining how you solve it, but comparing that to the other solves if they exist, or explaining why nobody else has been able to solve it to date, right? Like if you're creating some new battery storage technology that is so innovative and so different than everything else out there, maybe nobody else has solved it, but that doesn't mean it's not a problem, and it doesn't mean your solution isn't unique, and it doesn't mean you should still talk about it that way. And then the next piece is, so at this point, you've discussed who you are, what the problem is, how you're solving it. And in there, you're weaving in the scale of the problem, the size of the market, the competitors, and all of that. The final thing is really, what's your ask? Like, what do you need to go solve this problem? In a lot of ways, that's, you need money, right? Like that's the easy ask, but why do you need the money? What are you going to do with it? How are you going to apply it? Based on where you are in your company, you're going to have success or not already, right? You'll have some metrics, some key performance indicators or KPIs that say, I've been working on this problem for 18 months. And in the last 18 months, here's what I've achieved. And in the next 18 months, here's what I'm going to achieve. And here's what I need to achieve that. And so that's how I kind of frame that. It's, what do you want to do? Where are you today? And where are you going? It kind of all fits into that. So that's like, I think if you crush those, you've got a good pitch.
So you have been working with a lot of different industries, right? So the difference between success for probably like a brewery might be different than somebody who's putting together software, and it would be different from a B2C versus a B2B. So how do you compare across that? And for those early stage companies that you're working with, because, maybe it's like if you're come across a hardware company, for example, 18 months, they're maybe just finishing like a prototype that hopefully works, versus hopefully 18 months for a consumer, like they've got hopefully more sales coming in for what they're doing.
Yes, and and adding to that, if you could, in your answer, there's also, because I get a lot of founders who ask about, and because in the beginning you didn't talk about like the exit potential, which a lot of investors, that's their first thing they lock into, but you did end up mentioning that quite a bit. And so what's the, is there like, what's the difference between, especially if you are that broad across, as Isabel mentioned, hardware, and then a brewery, and then software and consumer goods and things of that sort, what are maybe some easy cues, clues as far as what is a good business versus, what's a good investment? Because you could have, in certain cases, revenue, you could have, there's a couple of things that, you and I are looking at right now. And one in particular where I didn't even know how to look at it as an investment because I don't even know what metrics to use, right? So I think I'm sitting that one out, even though I love a lot of aspects of it, right? But and then there is a network of
which one that is later.
But like and so while I am trying to be more of a generalist, there are certain fields that I know more, and there are certain fields that I'm very interested in and got to know more, or at least know how to superficially ask questions, look for red flags, and have a deep network to do that. And then there's other things that I'm like, hey, this is earning revenue and this is doing this and the team's great, or hey, it's not earning revenue yet, they need a lot of capital, and yet so many people are interested, and I'm a little actually confused as an investor, right? So would love to learn from you when you answer Isabel's question, kind of tacking on that element to it.
Yes, I mean, I think both of those do work together, right? And Isabel, I think to your question, every company is different, right? And every company has different KPIs and a different timeline to achieving those KPIs. But investors are assessing risk. That's what we do, right? Our entire job is to determine, what the risks are for a business and how do we mitigate those. And every time the risk level goes down, the chance of a good outcome goes up. And so at the first day of a company, the risks are, can they acquire the right team? Can they, gather funding to get them off to the races? Can they build a prototype of the product? Can they, it's very, very early stage risks. As you go later, the risks start to shift, right? So it's no longer, can they get the right team on board, but maybe it's, can they keep talent? Maybe it's, can they grow talent? Maybe it's, can they figure out how to, create a flywheel effect for their marketing? Can they figure out how to iterate their product to stay ahead of the competition, which inevitably is going to come chase them if all of a sudden they found something that's better than everyone else. So like the risks change throughout the life span of a company, and investors are there to, understand, identify, and learn how to mitigate those risks. And that's what we do. And so I had never invested in biotech or healthcare companies. And actually, like Vicky, I look at you as someone who has a lot more knowledge than me in those spaces. And I follow you a lot. Like when you get excited about those companies, I get excited about them because I know that you understand what the types of KPIs are and at each stage, what the expectations are for having reduced the right risks, right? No, it's not possible that a therapeutic is coming out in 18 months, right? But maybe it's possible that there's been some sort of design vet on the therapeutic and there's been some sort of market understanding on the therapeutic. And there's the team that is going after that therapeutic has done it before and they know what it takes to go through the right processes and get the right approvals. And so, the key thing that really matters is not what I know, it's what the people that I trust also know. And so if I only relied on my knowledge, I would be investing in ad tech and to a degree, marketplace deals, right? I know a ton about marketplaces, and marketplaces, it's funny, like it doesn't matter if you're an ad tech marketplace, or I actually sit on the board of a grocery marketplace that supplies, small and medium grocers with direct channels to brands and distributors. It's really fascinating business. And it doesn't matter if you're a marketplace for genetic sequences, right? Like these things, marketplaces are marketplaces and they have the same supply demand dynamics across all of them. And so I can understand those types of businesses and the risks of, two-sided marketplaces and what happens if they're not in check and one accelerates more than like I get all that. But I can't understand whether, the technology that's being used in a battery startup is good technology because I failed at, I did a terrible job in mechanical engineering, right? Like, so what it comes down to is surrounding myself with people who can understand those things, because when they feel comfortable that the piece that I don't get is de-risked, I can feel comfortable that the piece I do get is a good investment. And so that's kind of how it fits together.
Yeah, I was like in kind of circling the last question as well as the one that I had prior around looking at opportunities. Certainly, there's again, I like to lean on the audience around this one too. But one of the things that we all see is for what it's worth, lack of flow to some of our underrepresented founders. And we've been asking all of the folks that we've been talking to, what is it that the community can do to help in shifting that?
I wish there was a simple answer to that, but like everything, this is probably, one of those issues that's complex, and it's going to require just a sea change of approaches to, bring, I think, fairness to the process and, a balance to the types of entrepreneurs and the types of founders that we're able to invest in. And it's hard because everyone wants to, invest in the underrepresented founder that already has success, right? Like that's the easy investment because you can feel good that you're investing in underrepresented founders and you feel like it's a great investment off the bat and you've de-risked it and like you've got kind of that perfect mix. But that's not the case. Like not every underrepresented founder has had the opportunity to have success. And so that's where it gets really, really hard. I don't have an answer that's magic there, right? Like what I constantly say, is, for the founders that we invest in, we do challenge them to think about their teams, to think about their boards, to think about the way they're going to market. And one of the interesting things, and my personal belief here, which again will take years to play out, is if we empower more people to take executive positions and board positions that are underrepresented, we will create a new kind of group of entrepreneurs that we can invest in over time, right? Like half the people I've invested in were people who were in another startup who, rose to an executive rank and then decided they wanted to go create their own company. And they've lived that journey, not as an entrepreneur themselves, but as a startup employee, through a startup executive, through now they've got to go build a company. But if we don't have that enough underrepresented people in startups to begin with, and that are matriculating up the roles and getting to the executives and the senior executives and the board seats, then we're not creating that pool of, people that we can invest in. And so that's where I think, part of the problem is those that have gone through the journey and are, successful, they find a lot of investment. I certainly know that, like, sometimes we're fighting to get into rounds because, they're very exciting, right? Like we want to participate in those, but there's just not enough people who have had that chance. And so we need to give more people that chance of growth to get them into the ecosystem so that we can bring them through them so we can have more founders. Does that make sense?
It does. And it's interesting. I tell you, certainly we ask this question, and we have our set of questions that we ask on every episode, and that it's always been a great response, great candor, very direct. I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Well, can I tell you something, Sean? When Vicky asked me to do this, I actually said something to Vicky that I say to everyone who asked me to sit on panels or to sit on boards. I said, why did you pick me? Why? Like, I'm a white guy who looks like every other white, except I got this great beard, but I look like every other white guy.
Solid beard.
Thank you very much. Every other white guy that sits on every other investment, panel, that answers questions about why they're an investor. And that's not that exciting. And so I actually said to Vicky, I said, who have you gotten that's not like a white guy? And she gave me this wonderful list. And I said, okay, that's fair.
I mean, it was great to be challenged that way. I mean, Josh was amazing and he's a good friend, but I said you weren't the first. you weren't near the top of the list that I asked.
Good. That's good. I want to be at the I want you to have exhausted everyone that's good, and then you come to me, and then I'm happy to sit on your panel.
You're still in the top percentile, so for sure, early days. But thank you.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of untapped opportunity when you have diverse founders, right? And oftentimes it also comes with diverse pain points that we may not know about as well, because solving the world's most complex problems isn't just about the narrow areas that a small collective group of people, understand, right? So keeping that in mind, and then the kind of age-old debate of, is it the founder or the market, the size of the pain point, I think it's that sort, and then kind of tie it into your, like, all my million kind of questions on how you evolved in your investment thesis and your risk tolerance. And now that you're more of a generalist, and I understand that is a thesis as well, but being brave enough to be a generalist, because I would say I'm not quite a generalist yet. I would like to be at some point. Is it the horse or the jockey, especially if you are a generalist and you are relying on peers, and it is, I know there's no absolutes. Everybody says, well, it's a combination of the team and, the problem. And yes, but what tips the scales for you, unfamiliar with this first-time founder, and you're unfamiliar with, like, the pain point too, but because your risk tolerance is pretty high and you are kind of in the generalist direction, what tips the scales for you then, and maybe kind of a high-level logic behind that?
So the problem with the horse or the jockey analogy is it presumes that there's a winner take all to the race. And there rarely is. And so I always bet on the jockey over the horse, because I believe the jockey can navigate and find a second race or a third race or a fourth race to participate in. Now, does market matter? Absolutely. The right jockey in the right market with the right product with the right team, like, that's your holy grail. And, will that, guarantee success? No. But does that de-risk a lot of things? Absolutely. And you start to find a higher chance of outcome. I don't do only early stage startup investing, and that's because of risk, right? Like if I threw every dollar I had into pre-seed investments, I would lose a lot of dollars. And so, I basically partition my investments into early stage, which is pre-seed and seed. I do a lot of kind of late stage that are, pre-IPO investment rounds. And so my belief around those is, the horse and the jockey are already set, and you're growing to take as much of the pie as possible. And so in those cases, you're hoping for a double or a triple outcome, but in a shorter period of time with much fewer risks. And then I invest in venture capital, right? I'm an LP in a bunch of different funds, because my belief is that I'm not great at picking things until, I need more history. So I'm going to bet on people who are great at picking things and have access to deals that I can't get in, and broader kind of, reach. And so it's all of those things that also de-risk. But on any deal, for me, it's, the team is by far and, the most important thing, because they can navigate so many challenges, right? Like a good team will figure out a bad market. A good team will figure out product market fit challenges. A good team will figure out, competitive threats that come out of nowhere. Like, can they win them all? No, but they're going to be more likely to win them than a bad team.
We got to get you back to talk about this diversification model you just laid out there.
Happy to do it.
Pre-IPO and early stage.
What? It's again, like let's talk 5 years from now and we'll see how I'm doing.
Oh my goodness, so much to learn. But this has been great. Thank you so much for your time. And that wraps up this episode of Inside the Mind of an Investor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.